Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to turn to a very, very special panel with this year's Waterman and NSB Honorary Award winners. And let me just say on behalf of the entire board and on behalf of the NSB Chair, Ellen Ochoa, who can't be here today, congratulations to you all. NSB's Honorary Awards Committee's Chair, Maureen Condic, will moderate this session. So with that, Maureen, will you please take it away?
Absolutely, thank you so much for me. My microphone on. So it's my tremendous pleasure to meet with all of you today and to moderate this session where we're, as the board, are going to get a chance to learn a little bit more about you and about your exciting research and all of your achievements and accomplishments. I'll begin with a very brief introduction, and then I'll invite each of you to just take a few minutes to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, what you do, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions from the board members. So I'll start with, as I said, very brief introductions. Our first Waterman Award winner is Daniel Larimore from the University of Colorado Boulder, who combines mathematics and computation with real-world data to create new models that provide answers to globally important questions about how best to administer a scarce vaccine, for example, and what role rapid testing might play in mitigating viral transmissions. Our second Waterman Award winner is Laura Thompson from the University of the District of Columbia, who uses assistive technologies, robotics, and other methodologies aimed at improving balance in elderly individuals and survivors of stroke. Her research examines how such technologies can increase balance confidence and reduce the risk of falling in these groups of individuals who are at high risk for significant injury should they fall. Our third Waterman Award winner is Jessica Tierney from the University of Arizona, who has generated groundbreaking maps of past climate conditions and the system dynamics that produced those conditions. So her research has redefined our understanding of global temperature changes in the geologic past and has developed new quantitative understandings of temperature and climate sensitivity to past levels of carbon dioxide. The NSB's Public Service Award winner is Betty Lise Anderson. She's an electrical and computer engineering professor at The Ohio State University. Since 2008, she has led a program that has reached 35,000 students at more than 100 schools, libraries, and after-school programs, and scout troops. This program, which is free to the participants, delivers hands-on engineering activities to K-12 students throughout Central Ohio and beyond. NSB is also giving a public service award to the National Organization for Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, otherwise known as NOBCChE. NOBCChe's president, Rena Robinson, is with us here today representing her organization. Since its inception 50 years ago, NOBCChE has helped Black, African American, and other minority students and professionals to fulfill their potential in academic, professional, philanthropic, and entrepreneurial endeavors across many different STEM fields. So it's a stellar panel, and I think we're all very, very honored to have you here and to learn more about your work and yourselves. So I'd like to ask each of you just to take a few minutes, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do. And I think, Daniel, let's start with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pass the microphone. Sir.
Great. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me here today. As a point of background, I always liked science, but I came to academic research, I think, far later than many of my peers. I worked in industry after an undergraduate in Chemie at Washington University in St. Louis, and really only discovered the joys of academic research during a professional master's program, and immediately jumped into a PhD. But by the time I realized that I love not just science, but research itself, I was far too late for the fellowships and scholarships, for instance, like the NSF GRFP, and found my way TAing throughout graduate school. So this shapes the way that I recruit students currently. There are many, many students who love science, but weren't brought into the world of research as sophomores in college. And so when I recruit students, I really think about that. I think that we absolutely need on-ramps for these folks too, particularly if we hope to make good on our promises to broaden participation. What we do at CU Boulder in the Computer Science Department and in the Biofrontiers Institute in my lab is work in 3 areas. First, much of our work focuses on epidemiology for infectious diseases. And before the pandemic, we were working on the genomic epi of malaria. But during the pandemic, we developed a privacy-preserving method to track crowding in campus buildings via Wi-Fi. We showed that a COVID test sensitivity was secondary to its frequency and the speed of results. And we did the modeling to show that vaccines should be prioritized to the most vulnerable first, rather than going for a herd immunity first type approach. The best part of this work was to see its impact in practice. For instance, at my wedding last fall, we screened with rapid tests. And in fact, 4 of the guests got refunds on their flights and didn't come because they screened positive. And while we missed them at the event, it was wonderful to see that the science actually works and the predictions that we made were holding true in practice. The second big area for my lab is computational social science, answering social science questions at a large scale using data and computation. And much of this work may be of interest to folks in the room. It's in the science of science, where we try and understand the scientific ecosystem itself by studying its processes. For instance, a big focus is faculty hiring networks, the flows between departments as they hire each other's doctoral graduates as faculty. And the characteristics of this market, its prestige hierarchies and its network structure are fascinating. We're also working toward analysis of how peer review works, or doesn't, focused on the journal Science and Science Advances. And this work has shown that in general, prestige shapes nearly everything in academia with clear effects on hiring, faculty representation, productivity, and the spread of ideas. The other computational social science work is a lot of fun. We look at the structure and dynamics of online dating platforms, as well as the role of specialization in dominance hierarchies within hockey fighters. The only way that we can work on these diverse topics is the fact that everybody in the lab is bilingual. People speak mathematics, computation, and physics, and they speak biology or social science. And this creates a lot of very interesting conversations, and we set a culture of nobody ever knowing exactly their entire field in its entirety. But we make space for not knowing and then discovering and teaching each other. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the next few years to make continued progress in infectious disease. I think there's a lot of opportunity. That was the remix. Anyway, sorry, I'll wrap it up, but yeah. In any case, I think there are a lot of great opportunities in the future study of infectious diseases, which have become incredibly relevant. And we're also at the crossroads in the study of the scientific ecosystem itself, with great new sources of data and computational tools. I think that's my cue to wrap things up, Maureen. Anyway, thank you for letting me be here, and I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Well, thank you, Daniel. That was fascinating, and what an amazing example of sort of cross-collaboration and cross-fertilization among, as you term it, bilingual scientists working on a socially relevant project. So we're going to turn to Laura. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your research.
Sure. So how did I first get interested in science and engineering? Well, from an early age, I enjoyed being creative, problem solving, and always being outdoors. As a young kid, I was always outdoors doing things, building forts, riding bicycles. And I also enjoyed tinkering, like building model airplanes, model cars. And most of that was encouraged by my parents. Both my parents are very hands-on. My dad in particular, with my siblings and I, would have us build things around the house, fix things. But later that translated into engineering. So I had a lot of extracurricular activities as well, which helped sculpt my character. But ultimately, I wanted to problem solve, to do things that would help people. So that helped guide my academic career. I think it's the speak button on the mic down at the end. I think that's why it's doing that. Oh, yeah. Oh, maybe it's not. So as I grew and continued on my academic journey, I really wanted to use engineering to solve problems in human health, to ultimately help people. So what do I do and why? So at the University of the District of Columbia, I'm the founding director of the Biomedical Engineering program. We're the first and only ABET accredited Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering program at an HBCU. As the founding program director, I've created and taught multiple new courses and also was responsible for seeking out resources, for example, through grants and obtaining grants. And also as part of this, we created a new research laboratory, the Center for Biomechanical and Rehabilitation Engineering. So in terms of research, I focus on human mobility and balance. So in particular, people with vestibular loss. So some of my previous research had to do with looking at the effects of different levels of vestibular impairment, including the effects of a vestibular prosthesis on non-human primate postural control and balance, and how we can improve that. And this impacts the over 8 million American adults with chronic balance impairment issues derived from vestibular dysfunction. I also am interested in currently working in aging individuals. As you know, the aging population is rapidly growing, not just within the US, but also worldwide. So falls and imbalance in this particular population is something that's very relevant. And many of us have had a family member, parent, grandparent that has suffered a fall. So I also look at survivors of stroke and their balance. And so those are some of the populations that I work with in terms of research. What do I want to do in the future? So the Alan T. Waterman Award will impact my capacity to do research in a broader range of populations. So for example, amputees and veterans that are in need of prosthetics. Another kind of side item that I'm working on is developing a new research facility at the university. It's going to consist of multiple laboratories focused on biomechanical and rehabilitation engineering. So the key areas or the core areas that it will focus on are gait and balance, assistive robotics for rehabilitation, virtual reality rehabilitation, as well as biomechanics.
Wonderful. Thank you for that fascinating summary. And speaking as someone who has had family members impacted by falling, I think it's an incredibly meaningful outreach, not just to those communities, but to young researchers who are coming up in a context where they'll be highly motivated to make contributions. Thank you so much. So let's turn to Jessica. Again, in just a few minutes, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you're working on?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jess Tierney. I'm from the University of Arizona, and I am an earth scientist, geoscientist, a climate scientist. How did I get into earth science? Like a lot of high school students, I had no exposure to earth science because it's still really unusual to have earth science taught in high school. So I didn't know that there was such a thing as that until I got to college. And I was interested in science, but didn't really want to choose between math or physics or anything like that. So earth science is perfect because it's a little bit of everything. So we do math, we do physics, we do programming, and even biology. And so it's an integrative science that really drew me in. In particular, what I do is I'm a paleoclimatologist, and that's a fancy word for someone who studies ancient climates. And the reason that I'm interested in studying ancient climates is because of climate change today. So I was first drawn into that because I have always been interested in history of people. And what I do is more like the history of Earth. And that seemed like a perfect sort of synergy for all of my interests academically. So how do we go back in time and reconstruct ancient climate change? It's pretty difficult. And so we have to use a lot of different kinds of tools to do that. In my lab group, we do chemistry. So day to day, I'm an organic geochemist, and I actually do organic chemistry. And we extract ancient fossil fats, actually, from sediments that are up to millions of years old. And we can use those fats, believe it or not, to quantitatively reconstruct ancient temperatures, as well as changes in the water cycle. So a lot of my research has been focused on developing those methods and applying them on various different timescales from the last few thousand years back to 100 million years ago. In addition, we need to use climate models to understand ancient climates, just like we use them for the future. The same models that we rely on to simulate end-of-century climate change can be asked to go back in time and simulate an ancient climate period. And those models will tell us more about the physics and the climate dynamics of ancient climate changes. We also need to use a lot of statistics to piece together the past, because the evidence we have is sort of just in fits and starts. We don't have sediments everywhere recording climate changes everywhere we want to be. So a lot of our work has been developing statistical methods to take this sort of fragmentary evidence and then put it all together into these sort of full map view pictures of what climate looked like 20,000 years ago or 50 million years ago. So, and then, more recently, and kind of where our work is going in the future is, how do we directly connect the record of ancient climate change to our future? I served as a lead author on the IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 report in the water cycle chapter. And that experience really got me thinking about how my work could connect to predicting climate in the next few decades. And while it might seem strange to think about how could a climate a million years ago inform where we're headed, in fact, we've had some really interesting findings along those lines. For example, we've discovered that climate models are essentially overtuned to the instrumental period. So when you ask them to simulate climates at high CO2, they all do sort of different things. That's a problem because we need to know what happens when we get to high CO2 levels. Hopefully we won't get at super high CO2 levels, but we need to know. So by actually benchmarking those models back in time through ancient warm climates, we can suddenly discover which models are more reliable than others. And that technique is just now sort of coming online and will likely inform the next round of climate assessment. So I anticipate that the Alan Waterman Award will really allow us to start to make these more concrete connections between ancient climate and future climate change, and hopefully inform our predictions for the end of the century. Thank you.
So again, a fabulous example of a very integrated field that pulls in so many different relevant aspects to an incredibly important question that affects all of us. So brilliant work and a well-deserved award. So I'm going to turn now to Betty Lise to tell us more about yourself a little bit and about your incredible outreach.
Sure. But first, Jessica, thank you for saving the world. Hurry up. So my name is Betty Lisa Anderson. I'm an electrical engineering professor at The Ohio State University. I got interested in engineering because my dad told me to. He was an electrical engineer, and I grew up with science and all that stuff. And another thing that happened to me along the way was my dad worked at the university, so we lived near there. And the guy who lived next door to us was a professor in education. And he saw me playing with the younger kids in the neighborhood, and he says, I want you to be a teacher at my school. So while it was an experimental school, so while I was in high school, I actually went to high school in the mornings, and then I was a teacher in the afternoons, and that was a great experience for a couple of years. Well, fast forward to Ohio State. So I got pegged to do outreach. The department chair said, hey, enrollments are down. And so I started an outreach program, and I found out very quickly that schools did not want me to just come and talk to their kids. They wanted hands-on experience. And I realized that that was a lot of work because kids and stuff, and you have to make it work, and they can't fail, and it has to be inexpensive and all these things. And so what I decided to do was I ran a capstone design class because I was teaching it anyway. So I said, okay, you kids, your team's job is to come up with a really cool engineering project. It has to be engineering, not just science. And I'm going to assign you to the school, and you're going to work with the teacher, and that teacher's going to give you feedback during the semester. And the feedback was always, whatever time you think it's going to take 3 times that much. And then they would prepare their materials and develop the presentation and all that stuff. And then they would go back to the school and lead their projects with the kids at that school and get feedback and stuff. Well, that was a huge success because it turned out that our students loved doing that. They were all over it. And we started with high schools because enrollments were down. We want to recruit people. That didn't work. But the high school teachers started talking to the middle school teachers. And so then the middle school teacher said, hey, can you come and do something with us? And they're, yeah, we can probably extend this to middle school. And then the middle school teachers talked to their friends in the elementary schools, and you can see where this is headed. All of a sudden, preschoolers are saying, what can you come and do for an engineering experiment with our kids? And, So what we did, we eventually developed all these projects. And ironically, we do this for anybody who asks. So all you got to do is email me and we'll set a date and pick a project. You tell me how many kids. We bring all the stuff. It's paid for by alumni donations and by our department, who gets it. And we just take all the stuff out there, get volunteer students, and we go and we lead the projects. And we develop new ones and so forth. And it's interesting, the people who ask, we're learning a lot. We're going to a lot of schools that are very different from the school that I went to, you know, I'm a suburban white kid. And we're going to schools where if there's a student sleeping on the floor and the teacher says, just don't worry about it, leave it be, then I know they have a reason and that kid needs to be sleeping because who knows? None of my business, but these teachers are facing a lot of things. Sometimes we get invited to schools like we get invited to schools that are for students with learning disabilities. And some of those kids, maybe not so good in a traditional classroom, but you give them stuff and they are all over building it and making it go. And it's a really profound experience for them. Sometimes we get invited to schools where not everybody speaks English. I remember one class in particular was all immigrants and no two kids in the class spoke the same language. That was amazing. We did everything by pantomime and drawings and running around and showing people how to do it. I don't know if they got anything out of it or not, but those people are going to join the workforce sooner or later, so they have to know this stuff. So the program has expanded. The students who do this think it's so great that when they graduate, they say, can I stay on your volunteer list? Can you send me the materials and I'll do this in my community in Dayton or what have you? And so we have a lot of alumni who help. And then the engineers in Columbus who are working in industry near there, they get wind of it and they volunteer. So it just keeps growing. That's how we reach 35,000 students, is because everybody is helping them. That's the Reader's Digest condensed version.
That was a great Reader's Digest condensed version. And it's also just so inspirational to hear how this has grown just because of the love of teaching and you know, people who really wanted to bring people into the joy of science and engineering. That is just such a phenomenal accomplishment. Last but certainly not least, we're gonna turn to Rena. Again, just a few minutes about your organization, about NOBCChE, and a little bit about yourself as its current president.
Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to recognize not only the importance of science research, but the importance of supporting the science through people. So I'm Renee Robinson. I'm an associate professor of chemistry and neurology at Vanderbilt University. And I was first introduced to science through programs that occurred during the summer when I was in elementary, middle, and high school. And so I was always exposed to math and science. I was in environments where math and science were pushed, and we were always driven to accelerate to the next level of math and science in the year preceding where we should be. So in middle school, I was already thinking about calculus. And what was special about the programs that I was in is that they were specific for underrepresented students. And so I was in programs where I was around other African-American Black students. I was around Hispanic and Latino students and Native American students. And so I've always seen that there are opportunities and that there is this tremendous talent in people that look like me in those spaces. But it wasn't until I continued to navigate my career and go through undergraduate and graduate school that I didn't see as many individuals that look like myself. And I especially did not see that in the representation in terms of who was teaching the science, the chemistry, the math, and all those sorts of things that I was learning. That necessarily didn't bother me at that time, though, because graduate school and undergraduate research all have enough problems of their own and enough rigor. And so I just continued to press forward with science. As I navigated my career, just like one of the other panelists, I really wanted to work on problems that help people. And so I have research that focuses on Alzheimer's disease and health disparities therein. But what I really found value in terms of pursuing a career in academia was the opportunity to serve and to try to provide opportunities for students that look like me who didn't get to see diverse representation. Bothered me so much so that I decided to be a part of different organizations like NOBCChE. As a grad, see just a tremendous number of underrepresented professionals and scientists all in the same space. And that did my soul well. Not only was I inspired and encouraged by seeing other individuals that looked like me that were doing tremendous science, I also found community. I also found a sense of belonging, and I felt like I could continue to pursue my academic endeavors. And so I charted chapters in graduate school at Indiana University. I charted chapters at the University of Kentucky when I became a postdoc. When I started at the University of Pittsburgh, I charted a chapter, served as an advisor. I do that at Vanderbilt. And what's critical about what we do as an organization is that from our local chapters in NOBCChE to the national work that we do, we really have built this strong sense of community and family for underrepresented students. We have chapters such as chapters at The Ohio State University who are tremendous at grabbing students before they even get to campus when they decide that they want to go to The Ohio State University and major in chemistry or pursue their graduate program. There are groups of students who are there waiting to receive them to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks through these graduate programs. We have chapters who give back at the K through 12 level. And so one of the wonderful things that I've been able to do is to do outreach where you do have to figure out how to make things work and you have to be entertaining, but the joy that you get from seeing students make slime or whatever it is that you expose them to is just tremendous. As a national organization, we have opportunities to pour into middle and high school students and to nurture them. And so we conduct a STEM Bowl that occurs annually each year where we have students who compete from all over the country. And these students know more than I do as a scientist. Not only do they know the great scientists and inventors across STEM, but they can tell you all about climate change and chemical reactions and you name it. So we have programming that we do at the K through 12 level. We support our undergraduate students. So we have chapters and work that's done to make sure that there's community that takes place on campuses across the country, that there's professional development opportunities. And as our scientists continue to navigate their career, what's really important is making sure that not only do they have opportunities, but that they also have access to know what some of the unwritten rules of science and academia in these organizations are. And so we create spaces for our membership to be able to know what those unwritten rules are and to be successful in what they do. And so I'm happy to share more about all the kinds of things that we do at NOBCChE, but I think what's been really important for me in my growth is just being able to have an opportunity to serve in this capacity. And what we're really thinking about right now and as an organization is how to fully scale the impact that we have from K through 12 to our professional sciences. How do we sustain the work that we're doing locally as well as nationally? And what does that look like? As well as how do we just continue to support and build a community that allows us to have diverse talent in all the spaces that all of us sit in terms of science.
Wow, that is such a great story and such a great summary for an organization that does so many different things to support people at so many different levels. So I want to thank all of you for these really compelling short snapshots of yourself and the important work that you do. This evening at the awards ceremony, we will debut a series of short videos about each of you, so be prepared to be embarrassed. The videos will also soon be available online, so that will expand to national embarrassment, but well-deserved. I'd like to now open this panel up for questions from the board, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative by asking the first question of Betty Lise. Your work speaks so strongly to something that's so dear to my heart, which is trying to recruit diverse individuals to science. And you work with such a large population of people children from all over, many different kinds of backgrounds. Do you have any messages you can give us? Any general observations about things that really works to get kids excited about science and engineering?
I can say that what gets kids excited about science and engineering, I think, based on my experience, is they build something and it works and they get to keep it. I think that's the huge thing. Does it bring them into the engineering profession, I have no way to know. I can't measure that because most of them I only see once. But, you know, I can see it in their faces. I built this, it works. Hey, listen, my speaker is playing. That's, even if they don't say, hey, now I'm going to be an engineer or scientist, maybe they say, hey, I can do stuff.
Yeah, that ability to bring something into reality is such a powerful, compelling thing for people, and I think particularly for children. I mean, kids often feel unempowered. Adults tell them what to do. Television tells them what to do. Their peers tell them what to do. So being able to actually produce something and manifest power in reality is a really great hook. So I'm going to open it up to the board. Questions?
There are hands raised.
Okay, there are hands raised. So, Julia.
Thank you. So yes, a wonderful set of little snapshots, and I could talk to you all for hours. I'm addressing my question primarily to the 3 Waterman Award winners because it was really striking to me how each of you is crossing traditional disciplinary boundaries. And while we've had incredibly impressive Waterman winners before, well, we've never had 3, but I don't think we've ever had all of them that have so obviously crossed the boundaries. And so I'm just wondering, you know, first the question about, you know, how does one approach becoming bilingual or trilingual, depending on what you're going after, and what you see as sort of the future of science and engineering going forward, and the structure in academia. I just think that's a really interesting topic.
Okay, I'll go first. I think one of the keys is to, whichever languages you want to go on to learn, learn one really well first, and then step into the second or step into the third. I think for folks who go too broad too early, it's difficult to really gain traction and understand the roots of the kinds of problems that you're trying to solve. You know, particularly in a field like computer science or in applied mathematics, where there's just such a deep bench of history there, problems that have come up many, many times in the past under different names, in different contexts. To know that history is really important to then go to try to transpose those ideas into social science or into infectious diseases or into paleoclimatology. I think that depth is really important first, and then to bridge.
So I have a really broad engineering background. I think my core is in mechanical engineering. So I have a degree in mechanical engineering, but also I went on to pursue aeronautical engineering and then my PhD in biomedical. But you bring all those tools together when you're solving problems, like for example, tied to human health. So you bring all those skills, all that knowledge to solve and address a problem. So biomedical engineering itself is very multidisciplinary, and there's many different areas, but I think that's kind of where the future is headed because we're trying to solve these problems. We're going to need all the tools and skill sets that we can get to, you know, to solve them. So.
Yeah, for me, I actually credit a liberal arts education. So I think that what helped me see problems outside disciplinary boundaries is actually having taken many classes in non-science fields, in history, in politics, in sociology. And that just happened to be how my college years panned out. So it was just sort of by accident. But I do see teaching a lot of students these days, and my students who just go through college with only taking science classes sometimes aren't able to connect to the social dimension. So I mean, I agree with Daniel that at some level you have to go deep, and maybe in your graduate studies especially go deep on one thing. I actually like to encourage my students to think broadly from the start, and both because it starts to reveal connections that you might not see if you're only thinking about, I'm only going to work in geoscience or organic chemistry or something like that. I think also I spent a number of years working in the soft money area, and I think just you kind of are forced to broaden out to see like, well, what can I do with my talents, and like who can I work with to think of sort of creative ideas outside of my comfort zone. And that also sort of opened these possibilities about, hopping across disciplinary boundaries.
Wow, from 3 very different areas, a lot of wisdom. Suresh Babu. We can't hear you, Suresh.
But he's very excited.
Oh dear.
Oh. Okay, Mel had his hand.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Could, oh, well, no.
Go ahead, Suresh. Oh no, now you're lost again.
Could you give me a more specific example of the connection you made, Jessica, between liberal arts and sciences?
Sure. I think when you think about the concept, well, there's several things. So one is the concept of geology and stratigraphy in of itself is actually kind of a philosophical concept. So you have a archive of history that is written in mud and in sediments and is incomplete. And you only have snapshots of certain things. And so you don't ever see the full story. It's a bit like Plato's cave, yeah? And so you never see the whole thing. You only see parts of it and pieces of the puzzle. And on top of that, there are certain biases in how that record is represented in geological space. So it's not unlike how we understand our own, our history as humans, what we know about our past, what's written down. What's written down is biased in terms of who were the writers, who's represented in the historical record. Not everybody. There are actors who don't appear, who are less represented. And so we actually have the same kinds of problems that we have in geology that we have in philosophy, for example. So that would be one example. And, I think ultimately, on a totally different tack, teaching climate change to students, to young, the next generation they're basically panicked about it, and they want to understand, but they're also afraid. And there's this very visceral, it's a difficult thing to teach and not end up, I try and do my best not to be doomsday about it. This isn't over, this story isn't over. But I feel like I have to really rely on, what my colleagues think about, cognition and cognitive ability and philosophy and teaching when I teach students about climate change.
Suresh, are you back now?
Yeah, I can. I hope I can communicate right now. You can hear me now. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Question for Dan. So one of the things which caught my attention, Dan went from being an academic went to the industry and came back. How much that influences his ability to get other people involved in cross-disciplinary science and education, interaction with the industries also? Can you comment on that, please?
I think that we're in a time where there's a lot of focus on filter bubbles and being in your own bubble. And to cut right to it, I think that if one has worked in industry where you have a very interesting idea, and I'm sorry, but we release software every 6 months and your great idea won't make it into the next software release, try again in 6 months. When there are these kinds of brass tacks decisions, you realize that there are different ways of decision-making, different ways of looking at priorities, different ways of slicing problems. And so I feel that those students who spend some time in industry just get a different and broader perspective on science. They're less focused on sort of the academic take on science and more thinking about what can science do and how do we actually reach people? How do we build products that work, that people can use? So that's what comes to mind.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I actually had a question for Rena. You know, we as a board have recently articulated the Vision 2030, our views of what we'd like to see happen in science and engineering. And I'd really love your perspective on are there any specific things or goals or targets that you would like to see nationally for us to accomplish, or for your organization to accomplish in the next, 8 to 10 years?
Absolutely. I think, we've had a lot of conversation over the last couple of decades about how to increase the talent pipeline, how to have more diversity, how to have more equity inclusion. But I think we really need to move towards normalizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that looks a little bit different in terms of how we support diverse scientists instead of being an add-on and a supplement. That should just be kind of a primary thing. So that's a tangible, simple thing. In terms of how we build community, I think that needs to be a focus in all the different environments that diverse scientists sit, from the schools that they're in, as elementary school, middle school students, to where they're at in their professions. I also think that we have to look at really leveraging different types of partnerships to make sure that we're reaching students. And so, as we speak across industry and academia and government, we all have similar goals of wanting to have a diverse talent pipeline towards the ultimate goal of what we're doing with science and how it impacts us. And so we need to have more of those types of conversations and partnerships that go across these different sectors of the scientific enterprise. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization, is to take the concerns and the motivations of different types of partners, whether they come from biotechnology companies or they come from academic universities or national labs who ultimately all are trying to achieve the same thing, which is a part of the 2030 vision. But really, how do we do this together? And how do we not only develop effective programs, but how do we make sure that the pipeline is going to be sustained? And so I really think thinking outside of our individual sectors and boxes is going to be necessary for us to all see what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Are there other questions from the board? Well, if not, I want to thank all of our panelists for a really, really compelling presentation today, and for making yourselves available to us for learning more about what you do, and for answering all of our many questions, which I'm sure we will continue to approach you. Thank you so much, and could we give our panelists a round of applause?